lecture, we will talk about case record form design. Designing case record form is the very first step and very important step for data management and data collection in research. So how to prepare to design the CRF? First step, you need to have investigator meetings with the principal investigator to look through all of the process of data collection and also the objectives of the study. And then you need to read the research protocol, whether how many variables that you have to collect it and what kind of outcome that you want to measure. And then you need to looking at the protocol, whether there are any follow-ups for the patients or the event timelines that you have to record the data at different time points. This is going to be very important when you design the CRF. So there are some guidelines for CRF design. There are some things that you should do, something that should not do. So let's see what should be the first, the good guideline for the CRF design. First, the CRF must be related to research objectives. So you have to look through all of the objectives that you want to measure, you want to accomplish, and you need to make sure that the data in your CRF can answer all of those objectives. And then you need to follow rules and regulations, especially the ethics. We don't want your data to be invade the privacy of people. You have to make sure all privacy data and try to avoid record all of those identifiable data without unnecessary. And your CRF must be standard, but also at the same time could be flexible to each particular research, because who knows that in the future you might need to combine data in different study together to make more useful of the data analysis. And then you need to have instruction for data entries in your CRF, because not only you that collect the data, there could be other people that collect the data. So once they read the instruction, they could follow all of the rules or instruction to fill out the form correctly. Thing that you should avoid when you design the CRF, first, you should avoid the open-ended questions. Open-ended question is just very difficult to fill out and very difficult for data entry and analysis. I will show you in the example for open-ended question, but just keep in mind, if the question could be you provide choices for checkbox, that would be much easier to data entry and also the data analysis. And importantly, try to look through all of the CRF that you design and try to avoid redundancy, something that repeats and data that is not necessary to collect, so you don't need to put in the CRF. Because we want the CRF to be very concise, that could be able to answer the research objectives. So this is an example of the CRF that the CRF must be related to research objectives. So the CRF must consist of all the variables and values needed to answer your objectives. For example, in this example, the ethnic origin, we have Thai and non-Thai. If this objective of the study, you just interested in Thai and non-Thai, that will be fine. But if your objective of your study, you might be interested in, among non-Thai, you might need to look into detail who are they, like, Karen or some other ethnics. So in that particular study, you need to have values more than Thai and non-Thai to be more specific. And another one is the layout for your CRF. You need to design the CRF to assist data collector to be followed to the CRF very easily. So the one thing that you should help is that you need to put the layout in your CRF to make it in like group variables. For example, in this section will be demographic data, another section will be vital sign data, another section will be for laboratory tested. So layout will be very helpful for data collector to follow all of the data collection. And another important thing is data privacy, because we're working on other people data. So you must make sure that your CRF can collect the data that not violate data privacy of volunteer of the people that the participants in your study. And you need to make sure that your data could be collected in valid manner. So you have to make sure that the data in CRF must be corrected match with the data of each volunteer or patients. How to do it? You have to make sure that the study ID is correctly matched between different pages of the CRF. And you need to avoid collecting identifiable data directly and indirectly. Directly, like name, surname, address, house number. But there are some indirect privacy data that you have to be careful. For example, birth date. If we have small number of people and then you see the birth date, you can, even though it's not directly identify the people, but you can just guess, and then you can finally identify that particular person from just the birth date. So this data you need to be aware. And also, one of the things that you can do to protect privacy data is to assign the study ID for each volunteer to protect the privacy data. So in your CRF, there would be no identifiable data at all. Everything will be used by study ID that specifically specified for your study. And this ID could not link to a person. So when you have study ID, this is the first step for CRF design, because every CRF has to have study ID. So if your study has multiple sites that to collect the data, the study ID should have some systemic you have to specify, for example, the first three digits will represent site ID, and another 4 digits will be patient ID, and then you have initials, for example, like this. When people look through the study ID, when they look at the first 3 digits, they know that this case comes from which site. And another thing is your CRF must be standard but flexible. First thing, one thing that you have to consider is consistency in your form. Consistency could be in many things, but many times that I have seen is the mistake on the coding and the wording. For example, there is no right or wrong in this one, but if you make your coding consistent, it will be much easier for data entry, data analysis, and for other people to understand your data. For example, in this example, the first question, they assign code 1 for yes, 5 for no. And another question, they have 1 for yes, 5 for no, and there is another code called 88 represent don't know or not sure. But when we look through another question, now they assign code 1 is no, 2 is yes. So you can see that the first question and the third question, the code 1 for the first question represent yes, but for the third question, 1 is no. So it makes some, a little bit of confusing. And when you do data entries, it's gonna be increased data error when you enter the data, or even data analysis, because people might think 1 is represent yes throughout all of the variables. So just little things that you can do, make it consistent throughout the CRF. That will be very helpful for data management. Code response, also very important. When you look at this example, the question asks that, do you have any medical condition before staying in Thailand? No or yes? And if yes, please specify. There are many medical conditions that people can choose. And if they have medical condition, they will ask more on what is a condition that, for the health problem, for example, it's well controlled, or on regular medication, or, stop medication. Let's think that if a person has both hypertension, high blood pressure, and heart diseases, and if they can check high blood pressure and heart diseases, but how could they answer the question number 8.1 if their high blood pressure is well controlled on medication or regular see doctor in Thailand, but heart disease is, they stop medication by yourself. So there's no way to answer the question number 8.1. So you have to think about these possibilities when you create the CRF. Another issue is multiple answer. Some question you might need to have participants to answer multiple check box. For example, underlying disease, people might have many underlying disease, but if you have this multiple response, please make sure that you put in parentheses that check all that apply, or if you only single answer, you can put it check one only. Otherwise, people might misunderstand and check. Some people think it's single answer, some people think it's multiple answer. That will be create misunderstanding. And again, multiple answer questions, you have to create or design the CRF very well to make sure that people can answer the question in the way that you propose or the way that you want. For example, in this question, in this CRF, they just put the list of the conditions, and then you just let the participant to choose, and then they can choose more than one choice. But how could they do it? They just write down the number, or there's no instruction on this, and it will create very difficulty on collect the data. So from that particular design, you can design the CRF in another way in the bottom of the slide. Like, one question, you just put yes and no data. And then this will, break down the multiple answer into single question, each single question. This is an example of multiple answer questions. You can have the question like this in the CRF, evidence of bleeding, which is, some patients don't have evidence of bleeding. Some patients might have multiple sites of bleeding, for example, tourniquet test positive, gum bleeding. So they can put a multiple answers question. But what about those who, the box that leave blank? What does it mean? Does it mean that the patient doesn't have that particular condition, or the doctor didn't actually look through it? When you leave blank, you can have two possibilities, right? The patient doesn't have that condition, or we don't know. So in that case, if the box leaves blank, we have to guess whether patient doesn't have it or we didn't actually evaluate it. So to make sure that you really evaluate it and the patient doesn't have that condition, you can make the CRF in another way. For example, you break down all of the conditions. For example, tourniquet test, yes, no, or not done. So this will create more valid information in your data collection. And for the others, others can be many conditions. Sometimes people may have 3 or 4 other conditions, so you need to provide enough space for people to fill out the form. Code response, sometimes you can make the CRF more creative. You can put pictures. For example, this example, we asked about alcohol drinking. People might, and we want to estimate or evaluate the amount of alcohol drinking. And there are many kinds of alcohol, beers, wine, whiskey. So how could we evaluate the amount of alcohol that the participant intake? So we can provide the pictures and then let them answer on that particular pictures. That will help create more understanding between investigator and the participants. Code response. Sometimes you create the CRF that we are going to do like chart reviews for medical chart, retrospective data collection. And sometimes, when we review the medical records, we don't get all of the information written in the medical chart, right? So you have to always put some a checkbox for not done or not available, to make sure that, okay, you look through all of those information, but you could not find the information. So could not find the information could be, as I said, the patient doesn't have that particular condition, or we didn't actually evaluate that particular conditions. So to make your data more valid. And the unit of the laboratory test is also one of the headache things, because if you conduct a study at multiple sites, one hospital, they might use one unit of the one laboratory test, another hospital might use another unit. But you want to make your CRF to be standard that could be used in multiple sites. You might need to have multiple checkbox for different units that used in different hospitals. And then once you enter the data, now you know which unit that you have to convert. And again, one of the issues is date. When you want people to collect data on date format, you have to very careful and put the instruction on how to collect date data in terms of day, month, year, or in some countries the default date would be month, day, year. So in your CRF you have to put the instruction on how to collect the date data, day, month, year. So it must be specified very precisely. For example, this one. And right now, many CRF designs, we try to avoid confusion on date format. So usually the month will be written in letter. For example, January, we will write it down in JAN instead of 01, because 01 could be, sometimes could be misunderstood with the date. So this would be very, help on misunderstanding of the date format. And for the time, sometimes you need to collect on the time that the patient received the drugs. So the recommendation is that the time should be written in 24-hour format, not AM, PM, because it's going to be, duplicate of the number, the figure for AM and PM. And again, avoid redundancy. This example show you that, when people get tested for NS1 antigen, there's one question asking whether done or not done. And if done, what is the result? Positive, negative. Okay. In this case, we can rearrange the CRF into this example. So instead of have 2 questions, now we can combine into only 1 question. For example, NS1 antigen, and then you can have not done, positive, negative. So this, the above and the top CRF will provide you the same information, but can reduce redundancy in the CRF design. And And again, when you have redundancy, it will be very difficult for data integrity. For example, in this example, you have 2 pages of CRF that sometimes collecting the same data. For example, at admission, you have the first CRF on admission, and also the follow-up, you also have the data on admission. So it's kind of repeat information values in these 2 pages. The problem is that, what happens if people collect the data wrongly. One page, they have one number, another page has another one number. And when you check the data, now you see inconsistency of the results, and now you have to go back and check what is the real information at admission date. So, try to avoid redundancy. It will reduce the workload and also reduce the human errors on data collection as well. And some data that you don't need to collect it. For example, something that can be calculated from different variables. For example, BMI. BMI can be calculated from weight and height. Right? If you already collect weight and height, you don't need to collect BMI because you can simply calculate it from, when you do data analysis. Or if you want to calculate the duration, for example, length of stay in the hospital, you just collect the start and stop date. And once you have start and stop date, you can calculate the duration very easily. You don't need people to calculate the duration of length of stay in the hospital by using their hand, and then it's going to create some inconsistency of data once you analyze it again. Another issue is open-ended questions. Okay. Open-ended questions, it's something that you should avoid. If you can provide choices or checkbox that people can check, because open-ended question, people can write in many ways. For example, occupation, they can have labor, or sometimes they put labor with misspelling. And when you enter the data, it will, the computer don't know that it's the same things, right? It will recognize if spelling differently, it's going to be different categories. So when you enter the data, it's also very difficult. You have to type in. But if you provide checkbox and then put the coded, and then when you enter the data will be much easier, and you can group it in based on your objectives. But some variables that you want it to be open-ended, you can put it. For example, weight. You don't need to put in the interval of the weight or text box, because it's just simply write the weight. And if you really need open-ended question, you need to provide enough space for people to write it down. Another issue is referential questions. Okay, this is the most problematic in questionnaire design. So layout should be in the same page or the same section. For example, if you check no, you skipped into another question. So this skip pattern should be put in the same section. You don't ask people to go to another page, because it's going to be very difficult for them to follow. Okay, and you need to provide proper instruction on your CRF. And once you have all of the CRF designed, before using it, you need to ask expert to review your CRF, and you have to show with the research team whether your CRF is okay. Your CRF cover all of the information that you want for data analysis, because once you have CRF, you collect the data, you cannot go back. Right? So you have to make sure that you collect all of the data that you require, and that will go through data analysis very easily. So I think we provide you some tips or recommendations for CRF designs. Again, to summarize it, you have to check for the layout. Layout should be easy and assist people for data collection to follow through all of those sections. ID assignment, you have system for ID assigned. Make sure that your CRF don't have collect data, privacy data of the participants, and try to protect the privacy data. Redundancy, try to avoid it. Open-ended question, if you don't need it, make it some checkbox. And date format, you have to provide proper instruction on how to write down the date format and the unit. If you work with multiple sites that have different units of data collection, you have to specify the unit in your CRF as well. So I hope this will help you try to design the CRF in the good CRF for your research project. Thank you.